begin. Our next talk is by Remy Jaoui on the solutions for planar algebraic vector fields.
Hello, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to speak here. So I'm going to talk about one of my results of one of my preprint I did last year, which says the following thing. Look at the family of complex algebraic vector fields. Okay, so it's you can see that the parameter space is an affine space. So you've got the Lebesgue measure on the parameter space, and you can ask what happens if you pick a vector field at random. And the theorem tells you what is the structure of such a vector field. So for almost all vector fields of degree d, for a degree greater than 3, what you will see is that the vector field is strongly minimal and disintegrated. Okay, so this is in the language of model theory. So the plan of my talk, I want to do 3 things. The first thing is to describe the content of the theorem in differential algebraic terms. The second thing I want to explain is how I use model theory in the proof of this theorem. And the first thing is to explain a bit the geometric argument that I'm using to prove this thing. So let me first explain what kind of vocabulary I will be using, so just so that we all agree of what I'm saying. So I will consider only planar algebraic vector fields. So they are given by x prime is a polynomial in x and y prime is a polynomial in g is a polynomial g in x and y, and you can write it as also in a vector field form. And when you are given such an equation, you get a derivation on the ring of polynomial in 2 variables that extend uniquely to the ring of rational functions and even to the algebraic closure. Okay, and I will mainly talk about 3 things: about the rational integrals of my equations, which are the rational functions such that the derivatives come to 0. I will talk about complex invariant curve. So a complex invariant curve is an affine curve, so a planar curve given by an equation, which is invariant under the local flow of the vector field. And you can express that algebraically by saying that if you look at the derivative of your function f, it should be a multiple of the function f. And I will talk about generic solutions. The generic solution of E here is just a solution which is not a 0 of V and not contained in one of these invariant curves. Okay, so the global picture usually is that you've got something of 2 dimensions. You've got the common 0 of f of x and g of x. And you've got certain curves, okay, which are invariant by the vector field. Okay, so before explaining what happened for vector field taken at random, I'd like to take 2 examples to show what can happen for planar vector fields. And the first example I'm going to take is just a Hamiltonian system with 1 degree of freedom. So you look at, like we do in physics, you look at the Hamiltonian system given by the kinetic energy plus a potential, and you ask, what can you say about the planar vector field associated to it? And of course, the first thing that people realize is that the Hamiltonian itself is a rational integral of VH, of the vector field. So even if it looks like we're looking at a 2-dimensional problem, in fact, we're looking at a problem which is 1-dimensional over the fiber of this Hamiltonian. And so how do people do classically for solving this thing? Classically, we say that the system is analytically completely integrable. What you do is that you invert this equation in terms of t, in terms of q. You get an integral to compute. Okay, and the general solution of the equation you're interested in is not this function, but the inverse of this function. Okay, because I wrote t in terms of q, and then what I'm interested in is q in terms of t. Okay, so let me explain some cases. So what happens according to the degree of the potential? So if the potential has degree 2, what you see is that your equation always admits a solution in a Picard-Vessieux extension of C of y alt with the trivial derivation. So what does it correspond classically? It corresponds that you can make a change of coordinate, okay, and make the equation look like that, so that you can see that t is an arcsine of q. So q is sine of omega t, and sine and cos of omega t are functions which are known to satisfy linear equations, okay, so which are contained in Picard-Vessieux extensions. So if you look at something which is of degree 3 or 4, what happens is that you will not have a solution in general, okay? If you take a general polynomial of degree 3 or 4, you will not have a solution in a Picard-Vecchio extension of Cy of H alg, but you will admit a generic solution in a strongly normal extension of your field C of Y alg. So what does it correspond? It corresponds that if you do a change of coordinate, you reduce to this kind of elliptic integrals. Okay, and it's known that these elliptic integrals can be written by Weierstrass function. So in that case, in these two cases, we have explicit way to write the solution. We have explicit formulas in terms of classical functions to write down the solution of my equation. Okay, but as soon as the degree is greater than 5, if you're not in a very specific situation where the coefficient of V of Q are very particular, then in fact you don't admit a solution in a strongly normal extension of C of Y alg. What corresponds to that is that this integral in the general case, this one, okay, when V has a greater degree, it doesn't, you cannot reduce it to either a quadratic integral of this form or an elliptic integral of this form. And so how to prove this kind of result? Very formally, of course, it's intuitive that this kind of thing should be true, but so these are results that for dimension 1 differential equation, so for things that are supported on curve, Wozenich is the case of P1, okay, to study these kind of things. And then there are two variants. There's this one, which is in the language of model theory, and this one, which is a pure algebraic, in the language of pure algebraic geometry, where basically you can classify for an equation of order 1 which one of these three cases happen. So for this kind of equation, the main dividing line is to know if I can write down solutions or not, is do I admit a generic solution in a strongly normal extension or not? Okay. So let's see that what happens when you don't have a rational integral, so when the problem cannot be reduced to a one-dimensional problem, that more complicated phenomena can happen. So for that, I'm taking this family of a differential equation that has been studied by Rahim and one of his students, Weijing Jin. Okay, and they study this thing and they want to understand what happens according to the value of f of x. Okay, here that's not really a planar algebraic vector field as I defined before because f of x is a rational function. Okay, and if f of x is equal to x squared, then it happens the same thing that we've seen before, is that you can express completely the solution because they are contained in a PV extension of C0. Okay, you can look at the solution. The equation is very simple, it's very easy to see. What is harder is that if f of x is equal to x, then so this equation does not admit a solution in a strongly normal extension, but it admits one in an iterated PV extension. Okay, so this kind of phenomena could not happen in dimension 1, okay, where something could admit a solution in an iterated PV extension without admitting a solution in a strongly normal in a PV extension. But here you have this phenomena where you can admit solutions in iterated PV extension. Okay, and in that sense, you want to say that there's still a way to write down solutions of your equation. Okay, and if you look at the generic value of f of x of degree greater than 3, then your equation does not admit a generic solution in an iterated strongly normal extension, but it does in a mixed extension, okay, where the first one is an extension of the differential extension of transcendence degree 1, and the second extension is strongly normal. Okay, so it's not the worst case. Okay, you still have a part of your equation that is integrable. Of course, this is the part y prime is equal to xy, which is always a linear part. So this part here will always give rise to a strongly normal extension. And in fact, so what they do in the article with Weijing Jin and Rahim Moussa is to give exact condition on f of x to know in which of these three cases you are. Okay, these are the only three possible cases. Okay, and they describe exactly in which cases you are. So this theorem that I was saying before says the following thing: that look at the family of, so which is a much bigger family of complex algebraic vector fields of degree less or equal to d. We cannot give necessary and sufficient condition, but we can say what happens. We can give sufficient condition that happen generically. Okay, so we can say that for almost all vector fields v of degree in Vd, in fact, EV, so your equation, the equation associated to the vector field, does not admit any non-constant solution in a differential equation of the form, so a tower of differential fields, where each step in the tower above is either an algebraic extension, a strongly normal extension, or a differential field extension of transcendence degree 1. Okay, so if you think about the Hamiltonian case, how we were solving the Hamiltonian equation, the first extension we were making was a pure constant field extension. Then, okay, maybe you need a little bit of algebraic extension so that so the second one was an algebraic extension because I was working over C of Y, C of H alg. And the third one is a Picard-Bessot extension in the case where the degree was 2, 3, or 4. A strongly normal extension when the degree was 2, 3, or 4. And when the degree was 5, you had a second extension of this form. Okay, so Hamiltonian vector fields do not satisfy that. Similarly, I showed you that in the case before studied by Rahim and Rejung, okay, they always admit solution in differential extensions of this form. So it tells you that there's no way of writing using classical functions the solution for any planar algebraic vector field. Okay, and the second part describes the algebraic relations among the solutions of your differential equation. And it tells you that basically when you take n solutions, they are algebraically independent unless something very specific happens, is that you can find I not equal to j and a polynomial such that this equation holds. Okay, so a priori you want to look at something of dimension 2n, okay, to answer this problem, and in fact you only need to look at something of dimension 4. Yes. So let me comment on the first part. So the first thing is that until now I've been talking about generic solution, and here I'm talking about non-constant solution. Okay, so the reason for that is that there's a theorem of 58 of Landis and Kwiatkowski that describe exactly which are the generic solution of a planar algebraic vector field for almost all planar algebraic vector fields. So it tells you that if you, for almost all vector fields V in your family, if you take an analytic curve tangent to V, it is either stationary at some zero, so either it's one of these points, which correspond to one of the zeros, the common zeros of the two components of your vector field, or your analytic curve has to be Zariski dense in X. Okay? And of course, you can formulate that in terms of differential algebra. It tells you that you have no invariant curves. Okay? So the right picture for almost all vector fields is not this one, but this one. Okay? We know that the phase space of generic vector fields looks like that. Okay? You just have the singularities, but you have no invariant curve. This is given by the theorem. Okay, so that's why instead of talking about non-generic solution, I could talk about the solution which are not constant, and this makes the result much stronger because I can go from the generic solution to all solutions of the equation, basically. So here the condition I phrase and I call minimality. Okay, this is a condition that appears often under the name of irreducibility in the sense of Nishioka Umemura, okay, which they define to study point-level equations. And I'm using the equivalence between this formulation and the model theoretic property is not really obvious. You have to do a lot of work. Okay, you have to use that irreducibility in this sense. It's equivalent to the thing that the type is minimal. Here, I'm using that the type PV, okay, is of dimension 2 to formulate this result, and also that the type PV is isolated, and the type PV is isolated is given by the theorem above. You've got finitely many invariant curves. You have none of them. Okay, and the second thing is that for a type of order 2, being minimal and being strongly minimal means the same thing. So this is an instance of Johanna's theorem. I guess in this form it's due to Jim and Rahim. Okay, and so here I'm using all these equivalents. I'm using that I'm working in dimension 2, and I'm using that I already know the Landis-Kwiatkowski theorem. So the equivalence between the model theoretic property and the property I formulated here is not obvious, but it is true in that case. Okay, so this is what this part here means. And the question is here, you see that the theorem of Landis and Kwiatkowski works for d greater than 2. The theorem I gave you here worked for d greater than 3. Okay, so what happens for d is equal to 1 and 2? For d is equal to 1, you only have not necessarily homogeneous, but linear equations, so they always admit solution in PV extensions. So the case d is equal to 1 is easy to answer. What I don't know the answer to is the case d is equal to 2. Okay, and you see that the theorem here is still valid, so every of these equivalencies is still valid, and the question that it reduces to is, does there exist a complex quadratic planar vector field that doesn't admit a rational integral, and that doesn't have a generic solution in the algebraic closure of a strongly normal extension. I don't know how to construct such objects, and I do think that they exist, but I really don't know how to construct them. And if such a thing exists, okay, then the case d is equal to 2 is like the case d is equal to 3 and above. If such a thing doesn't exist, then the case d is equal to 2 looks like the case d is equal to 1. Okay, so for this question, I don't know how to answer, and it would be nice to have an answer to this question. So this is for the first property. The property I describe here as minimality. So now let me make a comment about the second property, this disintegration property. And to explain a bit what it means, I want to express that we expect something stronger to be true, that I don't know how to prove. We expect basically the thing to be complete disintegration. Okay, so you see that in your things you have, in the property of disintegration, you've got the number of solutions that you pick, and you've got another parameter, which is the degree that you're looking at. So what you can look is just define the property that depends on these two numbers, and that you say that it holds if for almost all vector fields in VD, something stronger happens, they are algebraically independent, not only if there's a polynomial that we don't know what it looks like, such that they are zero, but only if one of them is a constant solution, so one of them is one of these points, or two of these solutions are equal. Okay, and it's natural to believe that, I do think that for almost all vector fields, in fact, this kind of property should hold. So let me summarize what we know. So the Landis-Petrovsky theorem that I stated above, it gives you the case n is equal to 1. Okay, if you have one solution, okay, they cannot be equal to another solution because you have only one. So it has to be, it's algebraically, it's Zariski dense in X if and only if it's a non-constant solution. If you know how to prove that this ND hold, okay, you can, by a specialization argument, deduce that if you look at a higher degree, they should all be fulfilled, because in the family of planar vector fields of higher degree, you will have one which has degree d. Okay, so you will have one of them which has the same degree, and then you can play around this vector field to show that around it you can find one. That the generic one in degree d. The thing that there is one vector field satisfying this property implies that for almost all vector fields, you've got also this property in degree d plus 1. And the property of disintegration, what it explains is that if you know how to do the case of 2, okay, if you know how to do for 2 solutions, then you know how to do for n solutions. Okay, and we know that for every d greater than 3. So the other question that is interesting to consider in that case is, does there exist a d greater than 2 such that the property holds for 2 solutions? And if it holds for 2 solutions, by disintegration it holds for all solutions. Okay, so to complete this picture about the disintegration property, the remaining thing to do is to answer this question. Can you find such a... Is that true that for degree d sufficiently big, okay, you will have complete disintegration, and can we find an explicit d? Okay, maybe d is equal to 3 works. Okay. I have no idea how to prove this. Okay, so this is just for commenting on the theorem. So now I want to explain how we're going to prove this theorem. So the first thing to do is to try to identify sufficient conditions. In fact, here until now they will be necessary and sufficient to ensure that the set of solutions of E in a differentially closed field is strongly minimal and disintegrated, which in differential algebraic terms mean what I wrote before. Okay, we already saw 2 conditions that are important. Does E admit a non-trivial rational integral? And another condition, does E admit a generic solution in the algebraic closure of, okay, we want to allow algebraic extension, so we work up to interalgebraicity. So in the algebraic closure of a strongly normal extension of your base differential field. But we also saw that these 2 conditions are not enough because of the examples given by the pullbacks of logarithmic derivatives. So I'll introduce a third condition, okay, which is violated in the case of the pullbacks of logarithmic derivative, is can E be reduced by a change of coordinates, or more generally a finite to finite correspondence, I'll come back to that, to a system of differential equations in triangular form. Okay, this is what was happening for the equation which were y prime is equal to xy x prime is equal to f of x, it was given in triangular form. And this is why it's possible in that case to give necessary and sufficient condition, because you reduce to first studying an equation of order 1, okay, which was done by Rosenlich, Rzuchowski, Kai, and they put up, and I don't remember the last name. And then you have to study a linear equation over that base. Okay, so you are interested in knowing if your equation satisfies this kind of properties. And what I'm claiming is, okay, so let me express this thing a bit more algebraically. Okay, what do I mean by when is a system of differential equation equivalent to one in triangular form? So this is the notion of rational and algebraic factors. So if you take a complex algebraic surface, so I work in dimension 2, okay, so in the case I'm presenting here, X is the affine plane, but here it's natural to work geometrically because in this kind of things, arbitrary curves can appear. So it's nice to work in a geometric language from the beginning. There's no reason to suppose that X is equal to A2. And what you call a rational factor of XV of dimension 1, this is the following data. You've got 3 components. You've got a curve and a vector field on the curve. And you've got a dominant rational map from X to C, okay, which changes the vector field V to the vector field VC. Okay, so you've got a morphism like that in the category of algebraic variety endowed with vector field. So what you can do is define that up to interalgebraicity. So you will call an algebraic factor of XV of dimension 1, something where you start with XV here, you do a generically finite extension of XV, you get X prime. Since the derivation extends uniquely to the algebraic closure, every time you're given such an X prime, you've got a V prime which extends V uniquely. Okay, the V prime is uniquely determined by V. And what you call an algebraic factor of XV is a rational factor, okay, of such a generically finite extension. Okay, and you see that you can have arbitrary generically finite extension. There's no obstruction here because every time you got V, you can extend uniquely in V prime. And okay, this kind of heuristic argument I was giving you about being reduced in triangular form, I'm going to express it by trying to see if you look at the affine plane with the vector field here, does it admit an algebraic factor of dimension 1? Okay. And I'm claiming that it's enough to do that. And this is where I'm using a big result in model theory. I'm using the classification of non-locally modular type and of locally modular non-disintegrated types that tell me that these 3 conditions are enough to get my conclusion at the level of generic solutions. Okay, and once again, in my case, it's not a big deal to work at the level of generic solutions because we have a description of very easy description of non-generic solutions. So if you know that E doesn't admit non-trivial rational integrals, if you know that E doesn't admit a generic solution in the algebraic closure of a strongly normal extension of C0, and if you know that your system cannot be reduced to a system in triangular form, then you can deduce that at the level of generic solution, you've got the 2 conclusions that I wrote before, that it's strongly minimal and disintegrated. Okay? How much time I have? So I can, for the model theory here, I can give a sketch of proof of this result. So let me explain how it works. So the first thing is that the first and the second property implies that my type PE is not internal to the constant. Okay, because if you have something that is internal to the constant, either the constant field grows, okay, either you have a new constant, in that case you are in case I, or you don't have a new constant, and in that case you have a solution in a strongly normal extension. Okay. But then 3i for rational factors implies that PE is semi-minimal. Okay, namely that what it means is that you cannot have a mixed case. Okay, we saw that before you had mixed cases where you have strongly normal extensions appearing and non-strongly normal extension appearing. Okay, and in that case, you see that it's not possible because otherwise you would have a rational factor. Not even an algebraic factor, but a rational factor. And then you use that, using these two things, you deduce that PE is one-based. Okay, so one-basedness is a property that appeared in the talk of Tom this morning about things where you need only one solution to identify the parameters. Okay, and why is it the case? Because the constants are the only non-locally modular type in DCF0. So here we're using the classification of non-locally modular type in DCF0. Okay. And now let me, okay. And now when you know that PE is one-based, you use the theory of one-based type to deduce that if PE is not minimal, then there exists a minimal type over the same parameters. So if PE is not minimal, if PE is one-based and not minimal, then E has an algebraic factor over the same parameters. And the thing is that really here we're using the theory of one-based type to deduce that you only need to look at algebraic factors here. So that's funny because I'm applying the third condition twice. I'm applying first for rational factors to deduce that my type is one-based, and then when I know that it's one-based, I'm using it for algebraic factors. So once we reduce to that, okay, we have three things to do to check these three conditions for almost all vector fields of degree D. So the first thing is that, of course, you don't have any invariant curve. So in particular, you don't have any rational integral. Okay, the second part I will not talk about that much. It's something that I did in something which is still of another preprint, okay, which is in French and that comes from my thesis, which study these kind of properties, that how to show that an equation doesn't have solution in a strongly normal extension. Okay, and so how does that work here? Just to say a few words about it. What you do is that you construct an explicit planar vector fields of degree 3 satisfying this property, that it doesn't have any solution in a strongly normal extension. And then you use a specialization argument, that if you have any family of algebraic vector fields, one of them has a property, okay, it's a bit a stronger property, but one of them has this kind of property that it doesn't admit rational integrals and doesn't admit solution in strongly normal extension, then most of them, okay, have the same property. But, and also, this is very similar. So here you can build on the thing that we know what happened in dimension 2. Okay, in dimension 1. In dimension 1, we know how to construct such examples. So you can build in very different way of these examples to construct such vector fields in dimension 2, building on the example that exists in dimension 1. While the third property, not admitting any algebraic factor of dimension 1, doesn't have any analogues, okay, for a differential equation of dimension 1. So the part of the proof I want to talk about is the part that tells you that you don't have algebraic factors. And this is given by the following theorem. So if you look, you fix X, a smooth, irreducible complex algebraic surface, and with a vector field, and you assume that you can find a zero of your vector field, such that, so if you look at the linear part of your vector fields around P, okay, the two eigenvalues satisfies that lambda over mu is not in Q plus, is not in R minus, this is called hyperbolicity, and is not in Q, this is that the singularity is non-resonant. And the second thing you assume, so this is a very local information in the neighborhood of your point, so it's particular satisfied by many linear differential equations. So you need to add a little bit of global information to be able to study algebraic factors. And the bit of global information comes from the second property, is that the 0p is not contained in any complex invariant algebraic curve C. Okay, and as you see, the first property is satisfied by almost all vector fields. Okay, if you take a vector field at random, there's no reason why it has a zero, and there's no reason why the two eigenvalues should satisfy that. And the second property is fulfilled by Landis-Petrovsky theorem. There's not any algebraic curve at all. Okay, and then you can deduce that XV does not admit any algebraic factors of dimension 1, So by putting these three things together, you check these three properties, and using model theory, you can deduce the stronger version of these three properties that tells you cannot express the solution in successive extension of strongly normal extension and the extension of degree 1, of transcendent degree 1. So now I want to explain a little bit how to prove, how the proof of this theorem goes. So, okay, the most important object is a sheaf that is on X, the sheaf of one form on X, endowed with the Lie derivative. So, if you have a complex algebraic surface and a vector field on it, for every open subset of X, you have the derivation that I defined before. Okay, it is defined on the ring OX of U. So you get a differential ring OX of U with this derivation, and you have a D-module structure on omega 1 X of U over this differential ring that is determined by the thing that it's a D-module, and the data for generators of your module omega 1 X of U, which is given by the Lie derivative of df. You just differentiate f first and then take d of the derivative of f. Okay, you have to check that it's compatible and that it defines indeed a D-module structure over X. So, of course, when you vary in X, okay, you have this sheaf of D-modules that varies over X over the sheaf of differential ring OX delta V. And the proof it consists in comparing what happened at two different stalks. The first stalk is the stalk at the generic point. Okay, in that case, the stalk at the generic point, okay, is just a D-module over a differential field. Okay, the differential field of the variety and delta V. Okay, but I just want to stress that one thing that is hard to study this D-module using abstract techniques is that we know nothing about the base differential field. And that's why we define this D-module, to understand something about the base differential field. Okay, so we have no information about what this field looks like. And the second stalk that we're looking at is a stalk as the hyperbolic and non-resonant zero of P that we assume that this thing exists. And just telling me that if you have such a zero of a vector field, it's known that in analytic coordinates, you can use Poincaré generation theorem to make the vector fields equal to this linear part in analytic coordinates. Of course, you cannot do that in algebraic coordinates, but you can do that in analytic coordinates. So in this talk here, it's quite easy to compute, not in this one, but in the analytification, because the vector field becomes linear. So your differential ring is just the ring of convergent power series with a linear vector field, and and in the basis, in the usual basis dx dy of this thing, okay, given by, so here x and y are analytic coordinates, your vector field is described very easily by a very concrete D-module. So we want to understand the generic point, okay, and we can compute at the point P. We want to understand the stalk at the generic point, we can compute just at the point P. So how does that work? The first thing we do is that I'm going to start by talking with rational factors. So let's start with the rational factors of xv, and we want to associate a D submodule at the generic point of x. So how do we do that? We've got this rational morphism. This is a rational dominant morphism. Okay, we are in characteristic 0, so it's generically smooth. So we have the usual exact sequence for Kähler differential. Okay, so I wrote this exact sequence. This is a sequence of C of x vector spaces, and I wrote it at the generic point of x. And I'm looking at the image by the first map of the first element of this exact sequence, and you see that it's just a C of x vector subspace of dimension 1 of the space of one form on X. And so what you have to check, what the main thing to check is that if you take a rational factor, so this was, for the moment, it was pure algebraic geometry, I had no differential structure. So now if you have a differential structure and you have a rational factor, okay, this submodule is in fact a D submodule of this thing. Okay, so the thing that the compatibility of phi with the vector fields V and Vc, it translates into the thing that this subvector space of the space of one form is in fact a D submodule of this part. Okay, and we keep a little bit of geometric information, they are not all D modules appears in this form. The one that can appear in this form, they are always algebraically integrable. And what I mean by that, so you have two ways of saying it, either with one forms or with vector fields, according to what you like the most, is that if you take a submodule of dimension 1, you say that if it's algebraically independent, here you can forget that it's a D module, right? It works just for subvector spaces. If it is generated by a one form of the form df for some f in C, and if you look at the dual notion for the dual vector field that you see, the dual module that you can see in the module of so theta of x is the space of rational vector fields on x. Okay, that the dual is generated by a rational vector fields which admit a non-trivial rational integrals.
Is this f in C of x?
This is f in C of x. Yes. So we wanted to understand rational factors, and we linearize our problem at the generic point of the variety, and we end up having to understand the module of this thing. Okay, but what I was saying is that it's hard to compute here, but it's easy to compute here. So what do we do now to get from a D module that is defined at the generic point to something that is defined everywhere? We use foliation. So to study this, the D module at the generic point from the point of view of the hyperbolic singularity, what we are going to do is to extend them, okay, extend this D module completely on X, okay, and consider the stalk at P. Okay, so how do we do that? You've got algebraic geometry is very well done, and this is a very, very nice thing, is that if you're given a C of X submodule of this thing at the generic point of X, it extends uniquely into an invertible sheaf f of omega 1 of x. If you just say that, it's not enough. Okay? The condition to make the extension unique is that omega 1 of x divided by f is torsion free. Okay? And geometrically, this is also the property that appears in the theory of foliation. If you don't have that omega of x divided by f is torsion free, then you have many ways of extending a one-dimensional subspace at the generic point. Okay? You can just, if you have one of them, you can just tensor with an OX of D, okay, and you will get something with which has torsion because of D. And by uniqueness, somehow, if you don't have uniqueness, you cannot expect that the property that this is a D submodule at the generic point implies that this is a D submodule at the point P. Okay, but by uniqueness, it's almost trivial, and in fact, the proof is really one line, and this is really this condition that appears here, is that if you are a D submodule at the generic point of X, then the stalk at P is a D submodule of the stalk at P of the sheaf of one form. Okay, so to understand these properties that we want to understand, we have a rational factor, we associate something like that, we study at the point P. So what I say is that, okay, such an invertible sheaf F is called a possibly singular foliation, invariant foliation of XV. Okay, the property that it's invariant is the property that this is a D submodule. And okay, of course you can extend it, but there's a price to pay, is that the F might have a singularity at the point you're looking at. So you have two cases. So it's still an invertible sheaf, so you can still take a local generator in the neighborhood of P. And you have two cases. Either when you look at the one form induced on the tangent space, it is identically zero. Okay, this is the case where the foliation is singular at P. It's not a line. Okay, and otherwise the kernel is a one-dimensional subspace, which is a line, and in that case the foliation is called regular at P. Okay, you've got this association at the generic point. To a point P, you have associate a line, and at a certain point P, the line degenerates. Okay, and you have to understand these two cases at P. So how does the proof go? The proof goes like that. First, for rational factors, you start with a complex algebraic variety. You have a vector field on X, and you assume that you have an hyperbolic and non-resonant zero. So what you do is you consider a rational factor of dimension 1 of your differential equation xv, and you start by linearizing at the generic point, what I explained before. You've got a rational factor, and you associate a D submodule of omega 1 at the generic point of X, okay, to the space of one form at the generic point of X, and recall that it's algebraically integrable. It has this additional property that the foliation is given by a rational, it's not only a foliation, it's a fibration. So then only this D module, this D submodule of the space of one form, you can extend it to an algebraically integrable foliation on X invariant by LV. Okay, and now you can look at the stalk at P and compute at the stalk at P using analytic coordinates. Now you do that. You choose your analytic coordinates around P, such that V is equal to its linear part in this analytic coordinates. And now you've got this little lemma that describes the space of invariant foliations, okay, for a linear vector field, but you don't need to describe algebraic foliations. Here you need to describe analytic foliations, okay, because you work in this new coordinate x, y. Everything was algebraic in the previous coordinates, but in the new coordinates you kill the algebraicity. But by computing exactly with the ring I showed you before, by computing with formal power series, you can prove that there's two cases. If f is non-singular at 0, then there's only two cases. Either f is the horizontal foliation or the vertical foliation. Okay? And here, of course, so it's, when I'm saying vertical and horizontal, it's with respect to the new analytic coordinates, d over dx and d over dy. The second thing is what happens if f is singular at 0. If f is singular at 0, then in fact, f can be defined by a one form which is linear in the same linearizing coordinates that you had for your vector field. Okay, if you have a linear vector field, the only foliations that are invariant by it are the foliations that are linear in the same coordinates and with the same eigenvectors. Okay, so this is complete description analytically of how the foliations look like. And now, okay, you need to remember that the foliation is algebraically integrable, and to use this bit of algebraic integrability here to conclude that P is contained in a complex invariant curve. Okay, and so I've used my two hypotheses. My first hypothesis was that there exists a hyperbolic and non-resonant zero when I can do my computation, and my second hypothesis was P is not contained in such a curve, okay, which I use at the end to construct that I have a contradiction. Okay, so now let me explain what to do if instead of starting with a rational factor, you start with an algebraic factor. So the first thing is that you can always extend x prime. There's nothing wrong about extending x prime, so you can always assume that the extension k, so it's c of x in c of x prime, you see small k is equal to c. Okay, so that this extension here is a finite Galois extension of fields with Galois group G. So now, from your rational factor that you get on x prime, you get an algebraically invariant foliation f on x prime. Okay. So, for example, if your morphism rho is well defined at your singularity p, then the inverse image contains only singularities with zeros of v prime with the same properties, so it would be enough. But here, what we do is the following thing. The foliation in general does not descend to x prime. It's not invariant under the group G that I wrote here. Okay, but what you do if it's not invariant is that instead of considering, you just kill the action of the group G by sending a point x in x to, if you have your point x, if you have your point so if I have x prime and x, I first look at the generic point x in x. I have its preimages, x1, xd. Okay, and for each of them, I have the foliation here on x prime. So for each of them, I have a line over x. Okay, so since the morphism is generically étal, the tangent space at x1 of x prime is isomorphic naturally by this map rho to the tangent space at x of x prime. So instead of having one line, what you're having is cardinal of the group G lines in TP of x. Okay, you don't have one line, you have a union of a certain number of lines in the tangent space of x. Okay, so how do we make sense of these things? Which is to a point x. So if to a generic point x you associate a line, what you get is a foliation. Okay, now what happens if for a generic point x you associate a union of line? So it's just the following thing, which is very easy to see. that, okay, it's just the linear case. If you have a vector field and you've got lines inside a vector space, then if you look at the union of k line, you can write it as a set of zeros of the product. So if the line Li is defined by the kernel of omega I, then the union of line is defined by the product of the one form applied to V is equal to 0. Okay, so you see that what you need to do is to replace the sheaf of one form by the symmetric power of the sheaf of one form. And let me just mention that in higher dimension, there's something very subtle about that, and this is not enough to do that in higher dimension. But here, we are in dimension 2, and somehow it's enough to do that, but in higher dimension, this is not the correct definition. Okay, but here I'm just giving the definition in dimension 2. Yes, just at the end of it. Okay, and so you do the same construction, you get an invertible sheaf here. Okay, by extension, you always the same thing by asking that these things are torsion free, so they extend automatically from your point to the singularity. And now you've got two things to check. So if you start with an algebraic factor, you don't get a foliation, but you've got a k-wave, okay, of foliations on xv. And then you again analyze this k-wave of foliation on xv from the hyperbolic and non-resonant zero of v. And this is where this is enough in dimension 2, but I know that this condition, you cannot do the same game in dimension 3. You have to ask a bit more about your webs of foliations, at least. Okay, okay, I'll stop here.
Do you have questions for Remy?
So, can you tell us something about how the Linus-Petrovsky theorem is proven?
Yes, it's again a specialization argument. It suffices to construct one vector field with this property because, I mean, one foliation, if you construct one foliation on P2 without any invariant curve, you prove that if you have, you look at the Hilbert scheme of all curves, okay, and you prove that the condition that admitting a curve with fixed polynomial, with fixed character, with fixed polynomial is a closed property, so that if you have one vector field, you will get that almost all of them are satisfied. So now their proof is you just analyze the system of equation, you write them in homogeneous coordinates, okay, and you find an obstruction after the second step. Okay, you write down what. Now there's other way of doing these things. Is that for a generic, usually it's not possible to bound the degree of an invariant curve, but for a generic vector field, it is possible. So you can say that if you look at the generic vector fields of degree d, you can first prove that if you look at the generic vector field of degree d, if you don't have an invariant curve of degree d plus 1, then you don't have any invariant curve at all. So once if you reduce this to the degree, you look at a vector field of degree 3, you just have to show that there's no invariant curve of degree 4, then it's not that hard because it's a computation, it becomes finite. But there are analogs of that in any dimensions over much more general varieties than the affine space, so this is something that is very well understood.
But it's not answerable enough for you to get total disintegrativeness.
No, and I cannot do it in x times x because the vector fields, I want to look at the vector fields v times v, and it's not generic anymore. And here I don't know what to do.
But is it in higher dimensions? Is it still a condition about invariant curves?
About all invariant, that the only invariant subvarieties are the points, are the singularities of the vector field. This is valid at a very high level of generalities.
If there are more questions, let's thank Remy again.